Apple Bloom's handwriting. Supposed to be hoof writing, what the fuck. She ran forward and dropped the lantern to the forest floor. "Apple Bloom!" she yelled into the darkness. There was no reply. "Apple Bloom!" she called again, louder. Her voice echoed in the quiet of the woods. Nothing responded. At first. It was faint, but she heard it. The faint and distant laughter of children. Were they laughing, or were they screaming? The crickets had gone silent, but a new sound soon reached her ears. It was quiet at first, but it seemed to grow in pitch and volume. It was a strange, deep pounding that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It even seemed at one point to be coming from inside her own head. It almost sounded like hoof steps. Struggling to control her breathing, Applejack grabbed the lantern handle in her shattering teeth and raised the light to examine the note more closely. Her breath caught in her throat as she recognized the figure in the center of the paper. It was just as Apple Bloom had described it. Impossibly long legs and neck, a coat of deep black, a red tie so slight it was almost like a drop of blood on the paper. No face. Surrounding the figure were 5 crudely drawn little ponies. They all seemed to be dancing around the figure. Dancing or worshipping? She couldn't really tell. One of the figures had a large bow in her hair. Written at the bottom of the page was a single word in broad slashing strokes of blood. Run. She felt its presence behind her without even turning around. She forced herself to breathe, faced slightly to the right of the tree, and ran. She ran as hard and fast as she could, using all the strength imbued in her legs from years of apple bucking. The drum-like pounding seemed to follow her, beating at her from all sides. She stared straight ahead, the lantern lighting her path. She ran off the main road and deeper into the forest. She dodged tree after tree, jumped root after root, and still that infernal pounding followed her. At last, her strength began to fade. Her sprinting became a gallop. Her gallop became a trot. Finally, she had to stop completely. She was panting so hard that the lantern almost fell from her mouth. She felt around herself to check the status of her things. Her saddlebags were gone, probably ripped off by some wayward branch or tossed off in a sprint. Her hoof came to her head and felt only her mane. She lost her hat. No, she lost Pa's hat. The sorrow from her collective losses struck her heart, and she let out a single dry sob, her head drooping. Apple Bloom was gone. There would be no getting her back. And with the way things were going, she wouldn't be getting home anytime soon either. She raised her head to get her bearings, and saw it standing not 10 feet away. She gasped and dropped the lantern to the ground, where it struck a rock and shattered. The dreadful figure before her was lost in the darkness, but she'd already slammed her eyes shut. Her breath came out in little terrified gasps, as she shuddered in uncontrollable terror. She had no strength left, no will left to run. All she had left was the childish hope that this was all a bad dream and that she would wake up soon enough. She'd open her eyes and it would be a bright sunny day on the farm. Macintosh would already be out plowing the fields. Apple Bloom would be wishing Granny Smith a good day as she joined her friends on the way to school. Ponyville would no longer be in a terrified state. Yes, everything would be all right. All she had to do was open her eyes. Slowly she raised her eyelids. She stared at the blank white head mere inches from her. There was no face. She opened her mouth to scream. Applejack's disappearance was the beginning of the end of Ponyville. The townsfolk were stunned. Applejack was no filly. She was a well-respected citizen, a bearer of harmony, the element of honesty, a national hero. She'd bravely charged into the ever-free forest to meet this evil head-on, and was never to be seen again. What chance, then, did any pony else stand? Major Mayor called a town meeting 2 days later, and the decision was nearly unanimous. If this evil would not leave them alone, then they would leave it alone. In a matter of days, the citizens had packed their belongings, boarded up their doors, and set out for new horizons. Scootaloo, aboard the last train out of Ponyville, watched sadly as the town vanished from sight. Her parents snoozed in the row next to her, and she envied them. They still slept peacefully. She hadn't the heart to tell them about the dream she'd had the night before. He'd called her to her. Apple Bloom and Sweetable were with him. They called to her as well. Her time was near. It watched from the woods, stoic and silent, as they left. No matter, it would find them again. That was its way. It would stay here a while longer, shaded in the tall trees. The last few chosen could easily be taken, even from here. Its reach was longer than any pony could imagine. Here, though, was unfinished business. Some pony who had escaped it long ago. Granny Smith stared at the border of the ever-free forest. 2 of her grandchildren had been taken there, never to return. Macintosh was gone, but reluctantly. He'd done his best to persuade her into accompanying him. But she'd refused. Ponyville was abandoned. Now there was but to wait. She was done running. She blinked, and it was there, standing just beyond the forest boundary. She blinked, and it was out of the forest. She blinked, and it was in the south field. She blinked, and it was in the garden. She blinked, and it was at the porch steps. She blinked. Jesus.